So when Pokemon started celebrating its 30th anniversary, I decided to look at the Pokemon Center website to see if I could get this exclusive Pikachu plush they made to celebrate it. I couldn't, obviously. Thanks scalpers for buying all of them and then reselling them for $120 each though, shipping and tariffs not included. So glad you peaked in elementary school. But either way, I was looking through the many plushies. In fact, I was looking at just how many Pokemon, even Pokemon nobody ever seems to talk about or appreciate, like Maractus, which was one of my favorite Pokemon growing up, all still had their very own plushies that you could buy. Luminion, Beheeyem, Wormadam, Unknown A, C, and J. And so I was looking at several of my favorite Pokemon like Fortress and Wobbuffet, and wound up looking at this really nice looking Swadloon plush, and seeing I'd also been playing Gen 9's DLC, the Teal Mask, recently, I couldn't help but notice that Swadloon kind of looks like Ogerpon in a few bits, namely the top leaf and the droop down in the head, and so I started looking deeper and started wondering if maybe Ogerpon had some relation to the Swadloon line, especially given that Swadloon can be naturally found near Kitakami Hall. But while this originally led to me looking deeper into those two, as I was gathering the similarities to see if it meant anything, if I could maybe make a theory on it, it was only when I looked deeper into Ogerpon specifically that I started to realize a whole other Pokemon that has so many little things in common with another completely forgotten Pokemon. A Pokemon that doesn't even exist in Gen 9 and which I guarantee next to nobody else would have seen a connection with, but I'm certain has to be at least a little bit intentional. This is the Wormadam Ogerpon conspiracy. Ogerpon is a pretty interesting Pokemon in general, so for those of you who haven't played the Gen 9 games because you got scared off by all the glitches, of which are still present in the game, I still get softlocked during raid battles half the time, why are these still in the game, Game Freak? I'm gonna give you a quick rundown. See, Ogerpon is a legendary Pokemon that you get near the end of Part 1 of the Teal Mask DLC, a DLC that has you go to Kitakami, a region between Paldea and Unova, with Unova implied to be pretty close because the other two characters you do quests within Kitakami go to the Blueberry Academy that's in the oceans of Unova. Ogerpon was part of an old legend about an ogre that was set to terrorize Kitakami, only for another group of legendaries called the Loyal Three to steal their masks and defeat them. However, as we learn throughout the DLC, this is not true. Ogerpon and its former partner came to the land of Kitakami from a foreign land, only to be unwelcomed by the villagers. The only time they were accepted was when they wore these brilliant masks made by a mask maker that took pity on them, and thereby allowed them to go down to the village during the Festival of Masks and blend in. However, the Loyal Three, on the commands of Pecharunt, came by night to steal the masks, only to be confronted by Ogerpon's trainer, to which the trainer died, only able to protect one mask. And Ogerpon returned to find their trainer missing and their home ruined. Enraged, they went to go fight the Loyal Three, defeating them, but failed to get the masks back. Forced to return home alone, while the village assumed her to be a monster, and created these shrines for the Loyal Three, thinking that they died protecting the village. That is, until the Loyal Three come back to life during the DLC, and we're able to set things straight with the village about Ogerpon. Though even within the story itself, it's stated to be passed down by the great-great-great-great-grandparents of the current people of Kitakami, which means Ogerpon has been around for a while. Burmy and Wormadam, on the other hand, are significantly less special. In fact, the only times I've ever heard them get brought up by the community are in talks about how weird, useless, and forgettable they are. They were introduced in Gen 4, where you can catch them, but outside of Diamond Pearl, BDSP, and Legend Arceus, all only Sinnoh games, the only way you can even get Wormadam is if you transferred a Burmy through Pokemon Bank. Can't get them in Black and White 2, Sun and Moon, Ultra Sun, Ultra Moon, Sword and Shield, and even with Scarlet and Violet and Legend ZA, you can't even transfer them in via Pokemon Home. They are dead bricks in Home, no more usable than a bad egg from Gen 3. So how on earth could there be a connection between the two if you can't even have them in the same game? Well, there are a lot of similarities that Ogerpon and the Burmy to Wormadam evolution seem to have for some reason, which I'll be getting into, but just so we're on the same page as to where we'll be going with all this information, my whole theory here is that Ogerpon is either an ancient evolution after Wormadam, lost long ago, much like what happened to many other Hisui Age Evos, or Ogerpon is a lost, separate third evolution of Burmy that, for whatever reason, is just no longer possible in the modern day. Because Wormadam, as is a very weak, forgettable Pokemon that just doesn't feel like a final evolution. I mean, it looks like a cocoon. Where does it get to become something better than the 400 stat total? If Wormadam were to evolve further, then I imagine it would also take its gimmick further. And so getting to change your cloak that they otherwise were unable to change because of it becoming permanently merged with their body, at least according to their dex entry, and getting to change typing again like Burmy used to before they evolved, rather than getting stuck with one forever, seems like the next step. But however it happened, let me just show you how many things these two Pokemon have in common and start getting into the weeds of evidence for this theory. See, seeing as I was originally thinking that Ogerpon might be related to Swadloon, I was originally looking at whether or not Ogerpon could have made their clothing due to Liviani's whole thing of using plant matter to make clothing. It was through that I noticed the flowers on Wormadam, which at least to me look oddly similar to these bits on Ogerpon's body. In fact, Ogerpon's underleaves and torso in general bear a very striking similarity to Wormadam, especially with how it flourishes out here and here on Ogerpon's body, and of course the flower that I mentioned a second ago. And so I originally was thinking that Ogerpon could have scavenged things like their poncho, body, and general parts of their design from other grass Pokemon, though Wormadam specifically is several times mentioned to never be able to take off their cloak upon evolution. But either way, I started trying to look at other grass Pokemon that Ogerpon could have built themselves from. However, when I went to try and find other grass types that match up with details of Ogerpon's body, they all led back to Wormadam and Burmy specifically. In fact, it was through this that I realized there were way more traits similar between Ogerpon and Wormadam than Swadloon. For example, Burmy as a Pokemon has these notable branch-like legs made of twigs. You may imagine that when it evolves, it might be able to take these wooden legs a step forward, maybe give them bulkier legs. However, oddly, these legs are always lost when it evolves, whether it becomes a Wormadam or a Motham. But you know who does have wooden legs? Ogerpon, as their legs are these much larger, bulkier things, clearly made to be a tree trunk cut in half, as we can see by the core. Seems kind of like what a step up would be if Burmy were to keep their legs. Not only that, but if you take the official artwork of Ogerpon and put it next to the official artwork of Wormadam and swatch from one color to the other, you'll also quickly find that they are the exact same shade of green, and their flowers, which according to their hex code have some yellow in them, are also near identical despite not being pure white. Either that or I'm colorblind. Pretty damning given how many different greens we see in Pokemon. The eyes are also both this orangey yellow color, however they don't match up directly to this art due to Burmese being slightly more desaturated. However, it does match up with the rendition from the Mystery Dungeon games, which is pretty interesting. But okay, fine, they look similar, whatever. What about the games? Obviously they share grass typing, but that's too small for me. Let's look bigger. The wide majority of legendary Pokemon are completely genderless. Even amongst those we know the gender of, like Lugia. Of those that do have genders in the games, they're very few and far between, like Latios and Latios being male and female respectively. Enamorus is female, while the Force of Nature trio is always male. Darkrai is genderless for some reason despite their counterpart Cresselia being female, but amongst those includes Ogerpon, who has a 100% female gender ratio. Wormadam also has a 100% female gender ratio, in part because you can only get one through having a female Burmy. Otherwise you would get a Motham instead, which is a completely different Pokemon that has next to no similarities with Ogerpon. How about how Ogerpon shares a startling number of moves with all the Wormadam forms specifically? For example, they know Facade, Rest, Rain Dance, Endure, Substitute, Synthesis, Sunny Day, Giga Impact, Sleep Talk, Energy Ball, Giga Drain, Grass Knot, Leaf Storm, Seed Bomb, Growth, Solar Beam, Rock Tomb, and Sandstorm. That's 20 moves! But okay, plenty of Pokemon learn similar moves to one another, and plenty of Pokemon know moves like Rest or Substitute, whatever, right? Well, not right. Ogerpon in general, despite having masks of grass, rock, fire, and water, they get more ground and rock moves than they do fire and water combined. Most notably, the rock moves Ogerpon gets, Rock Tomb and Sandstorm, are the exact moves they share with Wormadam Sandform. And this can't just be brushed off as just being so they can get usage out of the Cornerstone mask, because when we look at the other two masks, despite having the Wellspring mask to turn to water type, the only water move they have is Rain Dance. And despite having the Hearthflame mask, the only fire move they have is Sunny Day. Both moves that are the only fire and water types that Wormadam can learn as well, which on Wormadam is 10 times more useless, given they don't even have a type-changing move like Ivy Cudgel to make use of it. Ah yes, let me just set up Sunny Day so you can incinerate me faster. Yes, please, thank you. That's pretty weird, right? Pretty odd coincidence? Well, here's another one. According to Bulbapedia, Ogerpon draws some inspiration from the Yama-Uba, a female yokai that lives on mountains and is known for cannibalistic tendencies. Wormadam, on the other hand, is based on the Baba Yaga, a female Slavic folktale character which lives on mountains and is known for cannibalistic tendencies. That's a Wow! But here's something even bigger to gnaw on that ideally isn't my calves. Remember Ogerpon's backstory? In that backstory I mentioned at the start of this, Ogerpon is stated to have come from a foreign land, and were unwelcomed for their strange-looking appearance, which pretty blatantly shows that Ogerpon did not originate from Kitakami, and most likely didn't come from Unova either, given its close proximity. So where did Ogerpon originate? Well, as I mentioned previously, the only generation you really can get Burmy or Wormadam is in Sinnoh, either the original games, the remakes, or in Hisui, which is just ancient Sinnoh. But looking at Kitakami, there's a certain side quest that I had my eye on. Perrin is a very interesting character because she outright states that she came from Sinnoh and came here to try and capture a photo of a Blood Moon Ursaluna that for some reason is only here in Kitakami, where she only allows you to tag along after you've added at least 150 Kitakami Pokemon to your Pokedex. When this is done, she of course brings you along to fight this Ursaluna, of which is the only one known to exist in the modern age, as the only other way to get any Ursaluna is in Legends Arceus. Even more interestingly though is its Pokédex entry in Pokemon Scarlet. Quote, "It crossed the sea and drifted ashore in a new land. Surviving in this place led it to take on a unique appearance and gain special powers." Given that Hisui is Sinnoh, and this proves that a Pokemon from Sinnoh can end up here in Kitakami, this could lead us to where Ogerpon and their mysterious partner came from. If they both came from Hisui, then make a lot of sense as to why the people of Kitakami said they had a strange appearance. The people of Kitakami would have never seen a Pokemon that looks like Ogerpon before because they were across the seas. In fact, this would also explain why, despite being shunned and forced to live in a cave for years, they didn't just return from where they came, or why after generations and generations of people in the village, and long after their trainer died and never returned, Ogerpon didn't just abandon the masks and return to wherever they came from either. The two were washed ashore, much like the Ursaluna, with no way of returning to Sinnoh, or likely in their case, Hisui. And with how much time has clearly passed, there probably isn't a Hisui to return to, and they know it. Ogerpon and their trainer were trapped in Kitakami. Now, there is one question that I wasn't able to solve, which is probably the biggest shot to this whole theory. That, of course, being, if Ogerpon is from Hisui and either Wormadam or Burmy evolve into Ogerpon during that era, then why aren't there any Ogerpon in Legends Arceus? I mean, the initial gut answer is that maybe it was from an even more ancient evolution from even before then. But that can't really be true either, given by the time of Legends Arceus, the Pokeball was only just invented, and Pokemon as a whole were considered gravely dangerous. Nobody really worked hand in hand with them on the scale they do now. And we know that in Kitakami, Pokemon were just fine. But by the time of Legends Arceus, we do see Burmy and Wormadam, and no Ogerpon or way to evolve them one way or the other. So what gives? And to that, I just don't have an answer. Except for one thing. You see, with how old the story of Ogerpon is, a big chunk of this is assuming that the visuals that we see are 100% accurate. The visuals we are seeing of a verbal retelling of a long passed down telephone game. And because of that, we assume that Ogerpon has always looked like how they do here, even before the masks, and that they still look exactly as they do in the modern age, despite how much time has passed. But we need to remember that whatever this evolution method is, whether it's a third tree in the Burmy line or an evolution from Wormadam, it's likely something that's not accessible in Sinnoh normally, that Ogerpon could have access to, but modern Wormadam may not. Something like the masks. The only thing that could make any sense, that would be something that most Wormadam would not be able to access, but Ogerpon could, are the masks. The masks, which are made of Terra crystals. Now, of course, this is me ad-libbing again, given that, again, we have very little to go off of in regards to the past of Ogerpon and their trainer, and nothing about Ogerpon and their trainer from back when they were in that foreign land. But when it comes to things that Ogerpon would have access to that Wormadam would not, and still matches up with common evolution methods, this could genuinely be it. This could be what sets apart the Chad Ogerpons from the virgin Wormadams. See, Terastallization is more of a Paldea thing, and the Terra Orbs we get are even stated to be a rarity that not everyone gets to have. In Kitakami, Terastallization can also occur, but only thanks to the crystal pool up at the top of the mountains, of which the crystals residing within are exactly what the mask maker makes the masks out of. These crystals are also implied strongly to be the same ones that are found in like Area 0, and thus are the same ones as used within the Terra Orbs, used to make Pokemon Terastallize. And with Ogerpon's entire gimmick being that when they Terastallize, their ability changes and gives them that added stat bonus based on that, I have to believe that for Wormadam to evolve into Ogerpon, it needs to be holding a Terra Orb or any item made of the Terra Crystals. In a similar vein to Gligar with the Razor Fang, Happiny with the Oval Stone, and Sneasel with the Razor Claw. In order for Wormadam or Burmy to evolve in this way, they have to level up while holding these crystals. Though with the Ogerpon we know, the masks are specifically what they use, I imagine if other Wormadam were to evolve with this, it would be different based on like how the Wormadam wore the crystals. Given Wormadam doesn't really have the hands to just hold them, and thus they'd have to wear them in some way to keep it on them. Like if one trainer made some crystal drip, then it would have different terrestrial abilities based on the different crystal necklaces it could get. Maybe different crystal hats, and that's what normal Terastallization is anyways. Crystal boots, give them those goth boots and 90s leg warmers for a dark type and fire type. The Cinderella slipper for a fairy type. The combination and type possibilities could be literally endless. Hey, sorry, additional thing that supports this theory even more that I completely missed but is extremely obvious. Ogerpon has this wooden crest around their face and poncho that is explicitly for the mask to rest on. What would the biological purpose of this be prior to the masks? Ogerpon probably evolved to get this so the mask could latch on easier because the masks are what evolved them. So if another Wormadam or Burmy were to evolve in this way, they'd probably also have something to better latch on to their new thing. So an Ogerpon that evolved via a Terra hat or something would have something to keep the hat in place. An Ogerpon that evolved Terra boots would have legs that lock on those boots onto their person, things like that. Because why else would Ogerpon have this trait given the masks were made and given to them on a pitied whim? Point being that because for whatever reason Wormadam are banned from Kitakami and Paldea to avoid invasive species or something, if this is the missing link between Wormadam and Ogerpon's evolution, it would make a lot of sense as to why it has gone this undiscovered and why only one person from centuries ago ever uncovered it. But with the Terra phenomenon beginning to outstretch into other regions like Unova with the Blueberry Academy, this might not last for long, and it's only a matter of time before some crystals are sent Sinnoh's way and Ogerpon becomes maybe a little less legendary. But hey, you'll still love him, right? That's all for this time. Leave your tip at the door, my friends, because I'll be seeing you around. Bye-bye!